La Nuit des Idées, c'est un projet qui a été inventé à l'Institut français à Paris, par d'ailleurs un jeune intellectuel qui était très innovant pour... au fond, ça fait partie de ces grands événements, comme on a la fête de la musique, comme on a les journées du patrimoine, qui est un peu l'héritage de Jack Lang, grand ministre de la Culture, en 1981, ministre de François Mitterrand, en France donc, et qui, au fond, à partir juste d'une volonté, vous dites aux gens faites de la musique, ça s'écrit d'ailleurs faites F-E-T-E, mais ça peut s'écrire aussi F-A-I-T-E-S, du verbe faire, eh bien les gens se mettent à faire de la musique, c'était ça l'idée. Et là, un peu de la même manière, on crée une idée que chaque année, une soirée, une journée va être dédiée aux idées, et l'idée que ce soit une nuit, la nuit des idées, c'est d'ailleurs, il y a beaucoup de références historiques chez Platon, par exemple dans l'apologie de Socrate, ça se passe la nuit, les discussions. Dans la culture juive, vous avez cette fête très importante où vous lisez la Torah et où vous en parlez toute la nuit, qui est aussi une nuit des idées. Bref, on permet aux gens de débattre et d'avoir des idées. Et le point important, c'est que c'est très pluraliste. La Nuit des Idées, c'est pas la France qui fait la propagande, c'est la France qui dit pensez, parlez, ayez vos idées, débattez. On peut tout dire, dans les limites bien sûr de ce qu'on a le droit de dire publiquement, mais et puis voilà. Et aussi c'est les idées dans le sens d'un dialogue, c'est-à-dire c'est un dialogue entre la France et la Slovaquie, c'est aussi un dialogue entre les Slovaques, c'est aussi le dialogue entre les pays d'Europe centrale et orientale. Voilà cette idée formidable.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Nous célébrons ce soir la toute première édition en Slovaquie de la Nuit des Idées. Le thème qui a été choisi cette année, c'est les lignes de faille. Et nous avons proposé de l'appliquer ici à Bratislava à la construction européenne. Nous célébrons cette année, vous le savez tous, le 20e anniversaire de l'entrée de la Slovaquie dans l'Union européenne et plus généralement de ce que nous appelons, notamment en France, le grand élargissement qui a permis de réunifier l'Europe. Nous sommes dans une Europe qui est en partie fragmentée, où la démocratie est en partie fragilisée et où en fait l'ensemble européen se morcelle. Dans les années 1960, je crois, le géographe Daniel Fauché indiquait « L'Europe est trop grande pour être unie, elle est trop petite pour être divisée, son double destin est là ». Et je crois que cette Europe, qui est à la fois riche de ses particularismes, mais aussi de ses valeurs communes, nous devons la protéger et la renforcer. Et au fond, je crois que c'est ce qui nous permettra de répondre à l'une des questions que se posait il y a maintenant près d'un siècle, un grand Européen, Paul Valéry, qui rappelait est-ce que l'Europe deviendra ce qu'elle est en réalité, c'est-à-dire un petit cap du continent asiatique, ou bien restera-t-elle ce qu'elle paraît, c'est-à-dire la partie précieuse de l'univers terrestre, la perle de la sphère, le cerveau d'un vaste corps. Je souhaite que cette nuit des idées nous permette ici de confronter justement nos idées, d'échanger, à la fois de mieux comprendre le monde. Nous avons un certain nombre d'invités prestigieux parmi nous qui nous y aideront, j'en suis sûr, et à la fois de réfléchir à des solutions face aux défis que nous rencontrons. Tout ceci pour nous permettre, comme le disait Garmorin, de penser l'Europe. Voilà. Je tenais encore une fois à remercier tous les intervenants qui sont ici, à la fois pour votre engagement dans ce débat, pour l'expertise que vous apporterez, pour vos propres expériences, et encore une fois, j'espère que vous-même, membres du public, vous n'hésiterez pas à parler, à confronter à la fois vos idées, même si nous ne serons sûrement pas toujours d'accord, mais je crois que c'est ce qui fera la richesse de cette nuit, que j'espère longue du coup. Voilà, je vous remercie et je vous souhaite une très bonne nuit des idées.
Ďakujem a želám aj príjemnú noc.
Bah déjà, on était sur un bateau qui n'a pas coulé, alors que le Danube était en forte crue ces derniers jours. On a pu survivre dans ce bateau, c'est déjà très très bien. Non, plus sérieusement, c'était un bateau assez contre-culturel, avec à la fois des groupes punk, un peu hippie, des réunions, un bar où il y avait parfois des féministes qui y viennent, des personnes LGBT, etc. Donc c'est un lieu très contre-culturel. Et il y avait, non pas dehors parce qu'on est déjà en automne, donc il ne fait pas hyper chaud, mais à l'intérieur, il y avait même le feu de bois. Et c'était une sorte de lieu assez convivial avec à la fois des étudiants, il y avait beaucoup d'étudiants, il y avait aussi des participants qui venaient de République tchèque, de Pologne, de France, de Slovaquie bien sûr, d'Ukraine. Et tous ces gens-là ont engagé un dialogue. C'est imparfait, c'est unscripted comme on dit, ce n'est pas écrit, c'est pas scripted, mais justement c'était dans la bonne humeur et en même temps un échange très libre, fraternel, y compris avec des divergences et des désaccords. Bah, il faut être à la fois très optimiste et très humble. Optimiste parce que la vie démocratique se nourrit du débat, elle se nourrit du dissent, comme on dit. Je trouve très important ce mot, le dissent. Difficile à traduire, mais on pourrait dire le dissentiment ou la dissension. Ça ne veut pas dire la guerre des idées, ça veut dire on a le droit de dire un désaccord et d'ailleurs en disant son désaccord, on permet le dialogue et on permet aussi de trouver après des terrains communs. En même temps, il faut être très humble parce que le rôle des intellectuels dans une société reste limité. Les débats aussi forts soient-ils, et même les plus grands intellectuels de ce siècle, je ne sais pas, John Rawls aux États-Unis, ou en tout cas du siècle dernier, si on prend, je ne sais pas, Michael Walzer pour prendre des philosophes américains célèbres, Paul Ricoeur en France, je pourrais en citer beaucoup d'autres, quel a été l'impact qu'ils ont eu sur la vie politique, sans doute moins qu'on ne le croit. Le problème des intellectuels, c'est que c'est à la fois très important, puisque les hommes politiques se nourrissent d'idées, et en même temps, un homme politique et un intellectuel ne font pas le même métier. J'ai appris ça depuis très longtemps, qu'au fond, un homme politique, c'est un intellectuel qui ne pense pas. Alors qu'un intellectuel, par nature, c'est quelqu'un qui pense, mais qui est dans la fameuse culture de la conviction et non pas de la responsabilité, pour prendre la fameuse formule de Max Weber. Donc il faut à la fois être optimiste sur le rôle de débat d'idées qui est très très important et vital, et sans doute que la France fasse ça ici, c'est extrêmement judicieux et je dirais vraiment central. En même temps, la vie politique et même la vie en société, hélas, ne se nourrit pas que d'idées.
Et quels thèmes principaux ont été abordés lors de cette première nuit?
Ici, on est en Slovaquie, on était avec des Polonais, on était avec, je l'ai dit, un Ukrainien, il y avait des Ukrainiens dans la salle, il y avait aussi des Tchèques, etc. Donc, des Français, on est forcément dans le rapport Est-Ouest, qui est un peu un faux rapport, parce qu'il n'y a pas d'un côté l'Ouest et d'un côté l'Est. Enfin, c'est vrai qu'il y a un l'Ouest et l'Est d'un point de vue géographique, évidemment, mais il n'y a pas une Old Europe et une New Europe. Il y a essentiellement, je dirais, des divisions, des dissensions entre des évolutions peut-être plus libérales, d'autres peut-être un petit peu plus autoritaires, aussi tout ça avec imprégné d'autres questions, la question, je dirais, de la modernité du rapport à l'Union européenne, au libéralisme, à l'illibéralisme, à la question de la démocratie, comme elle va, la question aussi de l'état de droit et des libertés. Mais tout ça n'est pas d'un côté serait à l'ouest et de l'autre serait à l'est. C'est beaucoup plus divisé. Il y a au fond en France des forces illibérales, des forces libérales. Il y a des gens qui sont plus autoritaires, des gens qui sont peut-être plus fortement imprégnés de démocratie. Et c'est vrai aussi en Slovaquie. Et donc vous avez des tensions qui existent non seulement entre les pays, Aussi au sein des pays d'Europe dite centrale et orientale, il y a des tensions. Et enfin, vous avez des tensions au sein même de chacun de ces pays, à travers les générations, à travers parfois les origines ethniques, linguistiques, selon les pays d'Europe centrale et orientale, entre la Roumanie et la Hongrie, entre, je dirais, la République tchèque et la Pologne, entre les Slovaques et les Tchèques. Et alors, c'est là où je crois que nous sommes tous le produit d'identités multiples. On peut être en désaccord, par exemple, politiquement, mais on peut être en accord, alors même qu'on a ces désaccords, parce que, je ne sais pas, on est tous les deux intellectuels et donc on respecte le débat d'idées, ou alors on est deux femmes lesbiennes et donc il y a un lien qui va se faire, un dialogue qui est possible, alors même qu'on est en désaccord sur la politique. Et je crois que c'est toujours important de penser qu'on n'est pas le produit d'une seule identité. Ici, on est slovaque, mais on appartient à l'Europe centrale et orientale, on appartient à une identité culturelle qui est aussi avec les Tchèques, et puis on est aussi européen. Et donc déjà, ça fait plusieurs identités.
Before coming, now is the time to start our debate. Let me introduce our guests. The first who is going to co-run this evening of ideas is French writer, sociologist and journalist Frédéric Martel. Here we are. In the middle, we have Professor Alexandra Bitušíková from Banská Bystrica. Thank you very much for coming.
We are going to have two panels. The first one, we already said that we don't like the title, so we are going to change the title of the panel. Basically, we are focusing mainly on New Europe. That's our way to frame it. I remember that the general title of La Nuit des Idées, it's Les Lignes de Faille, which is difficult to translate. I mean, the fault line basically. So we really are on the edge. We are in the between two worlds. But the two worlds are not necessarily the East and the West. The two worlds can be many things. Can be populism versus something less populist. Can be democracy or not so democratic. Can be illiberal state or something more liberal, but not always that. So the debate is pretty open. I would like to begin with. Because we have prepared with our guests, so I would like to begin first of all with Alexandra Bitušíková, because first of all she's a woman and she's I want to be not just gender correct, but also we were last night together in the ambassador house of Nicolas Suran, and I heard you were speaking a lot. So, no, but you were speaking interesting things, a lot of interesting things. You can maybe explain what you have done with Not in Our Town, and more to the point, how from that kind of example you can discuss the overall problematic of democracy versus less democracy, illiberal states, and what we see in many places.
Thank you very much. I thought that being in this nice company of distinguished men, I would not have any space to talk, because men like talking more than women often. But okay, thank you for giving me this chance.
Thank you for your intervention. The next speaker is going to be...
I'm a social anthropologist, an academic also, like many of us here. But in this panel, I don't find myself as an academic, but more as an engaged citizen, I would say, or active citizen, because some of you know that in 2013 in Banská Bystrica, we elected in regional elections neo-Nazi governor in real democratic elections, and it was such a terrible shock then. Now it's not a shock because we have them everywhere around, but at that time it was really a shock, and a number of citizens, my friends from NGOs, from academia, from the church, from Roma community, young people, older people like me, we met that evening of the elections, and we started to discuss first we cried, we lit candles, and we said that we cannot allow this happen again. We have to do something. So we discussed this more and more for a few months, and then we decided that we are going to establish a grassroots movement, not in our town, we called it. We knew that we couldn't, of course, refuse the result of democratic elections. That was not the case. But we knew that we had to do some activities. We are pro-democratic and we have to change some voting behavior of the people in the region. So we started three main activities, I would say. One is a multicultural festival embargo, which happens every year in Zahrada, in Independent Cultural Center in Banská Bystrica. The second activity, which runs now for 11 years, is Schools for Democracy. We are at 40 schools in the region now within this informal but accredited by the ministry program, where we have living libraries, and we talk to every month. Volunteers from our group talk to students at either civic education or history classes, and it's about so-called value-based education. And then the third activity we do is Human Forum, which is a platform, a conference, we can say, a 3-day conference in Banská Bystrica, Human Forum, which this year we will have 11th year. And it's really a big platform for connecting and networking people from various sectors, from civil society, from academia. We try to have also some business sector there, municipalities, and it's a platform about the discussion platform about democracy and human rights.
I would like to draw back the attention of why we were thinking about possibly talking about this topic, because now obviously we have maybe more than two Europes. We have like old Europe, new Europe, and then we have the fighting Europe on the east. This is some brand new reality of this continent. We didn't have since the Second World War, maybe the exception of Yugoslavian Civil War, but this is very, very different. So I would be glad if you try to answer how these words were created and how these concepts of old Europe and new Europe were created, and what was maybe the meaning of using them at the time, please.
Thank you. Easy question. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And maybe just to be transparent, I have to say that necessarily I have a double view on things because I'm a Czech, as it was said, but I have been living in France for quite a long time, and by the way, I am already a French citizen as well, so necessarily I mix the perspectives between France and the Czech Republic. And especially on this kind of questions, of this kind of debates, it's quite interesting. One could become schizophrenic, but I think it can be interesting to compare these views. Well, basically what I would say is that fortunately for Europe, it's very diverse, but its diversity is organized on various models, on various groups, meaning that depending on subjects, the coalitions will be different. But unfortunately for Europe, people need simple approaches. And people love, and when I say people, I mean everybody, but mostly journalists, politicians, love binary approaches. So old, new, east, west, bad, good, well, we love that, and it's normal because it makes things easier to understand. I think the first prominent person who used the old and new Europe division was Donald Rumsfeld, and he did it for very pragmatic reasons, because he wanted to highlight that the fact that France and Germany are not supporting the US in Iraq war, it's not relevant anymore, because there is a new Europe which is behind the US. So for him it was very good, but already at the time it was totally false. Behind the US, you had also Spain, Italy, and Portugal, and some Central and Eastern Europe countries were not so happy about that. So I think that the problem we very often have in debates on Europe is that we are pushed to this attempt to simplify, to oversimplify things with easy cleavages, which are generally actually dangerous because they create impression of sometimes stronger differences than they actually are. I can accept the idea of an old and new Europe, as I explained in our exchanges, that definitely the new Europe is the today Europe, which slowly is evolving, and from that point of view, tragically, but the war in Ukraine maybe accelerated this evolution to have a Europe which is authentically integrating the view and the memories and the historical experiences of the whole continent. We were not as able as we should have been to integrate the experiences. And I'm not blaming anything, or rather I blame everybody. It's not just the evil West who was not willing to listen to the Easterners. Also people and especially politicians in the East were not necessarily very skillful in, putting things on the table and in making them, let's say, audible for Western partners.
But just to go back on what you are saying, sorry to ask you a second question, but what is interesting in your approach is that the East-West debate doesn't work, and you say that illiberalism can be West and can be East, so there is no such a border. But what is even more interesting is that you see and you say when you write, that's why I asked you the question, that this distinction can also be done within the different countries. So it's a separation that is not clear at all, but also within a country you can have, which we know in France, we know that of course in UK with Brexit, with Vox in Spain, the 5 stars, and also Meloni in Italy, and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, definitely. It's another simplification to consider states and nations like monoliths, and of course we all know they are not. So, and again, it's very convenient to say Portuguese or Spanish or Czechs are doing that or that. Well, we need to dig a little deeper to see that actually things are much more complicated.
Solange Maslovsky, now I like a lot what you said to us in the preparation, because you basically discussed the role and how we can make stronger the civil society, what you call, and the first time I heard that, CSO, so civil society organization, basically. So my question is, and you have a very strong experience here in Slovakia, but mainly also in Poland, in Czech Republic and in Macedonia, so it's you can make some comparison. So the question is, what is the role of this kind of civil society organization, and how we can have them and helping us building up a more democratic state.
Yes, so civil society has a key role in the building up and the maintenance of democratic society. First of all, because they are on the field, they are the closest stakeholder to the citizens. So they are able to identify challenges, they are able to listen to the needs, they are able to react quickly, and they're also able to respond to the needs, able to teach. Also the teaching is very important. Of course, civil society comprehends a large variety of organizations. There might be think tanks, social service, sport association, education association, but the role is also to teach, to educate the citizens, to make citizens like responsible and informed citizens, and to defend their rights. When I arrived in Czech Republic, it was a long time ago. It was in the year 90s. there was no civil society, after the communism. And I was looking for consumer organizations which are defending the rights of consumers, And in France was one of the best countries in the EU for the defense of consumers. But there was no consumer organization, and also step by step emerged some organization. But the problem was that the Czech citizens were not aware of their rights, and they were not even informed about the existence of this organization. So they didn't have any recourse to this organization, and they didn't trust that something will change, So.
But if I would like to challenge you a little bit,
yes.
is when we discuss with people that support, for example, Marine Le Pen in France, they will tell us that they want to build a stronger civil society. They want to have consumer organization as well. They want to make their own organization because they think the elite has taken the power, and though they want to give back to civil society. So with this kind of devil advocate question, how in a way you help democracy, because you can also destroy democracy with civil society in a way, or not? It's a question.
Yes, you help by spreading EU values, democratic values.
We had this great idea 20 years ago about the end of the history. But when you look back 20 years ago, you think that history just started in '89 in Europe, because we had all these crises you just mentioned. We had pandemics, huge war at European continent. And so I would like to draw your attention to the question of Ukraine, because you just told that the Western Europeans were kind of laxist and take everything for granted. But we have a brand new situation, which we used to learn only in the books. And it was supposed not to appear again, never again, in European continent. So what does it mean to fighting for the idea of European identity, for European historicity in the case of Ukrainian fighters? What does it make as a feeling, not only emotion, but also cognitive way of apprehending the world, the situation we had in Ukraine since now almost third year? Please.
Thank you very much. I am not from New Europe. I am from ancient Kiev. And I was born in Kiev, and as a researcher of Russian hybridity and as an associate professor, I prepare 10 points about Ukraine and Europe, or Europe and Ukraine. At first, Ukraine is a European country whose independence was restored in 1991. And don't try imagine Europe without us. Second, Ukraine was a colony of Russia for a long time. And we must recognize that statelessness has been one of our major problems. When you hear a Russian language from Ukrainian citizens in many countries of Europe, it's a heritage of Russian Empire. Before Russian invasion, more than 90% of experts and politicians said that Ukraine would collapse, predicted our collapse. But our fighting continue, and more than 900 days of fighting of the biggest war in contemporary world, not only in Europe. 4. Revolution of dignity was fought under EU flag, and now Ukraine fighting under blue-yellow, our state flag. and freedom is a choice of millions of Ukrainians. I think that there have never been so many Ukrainians ready to fight for Ukraine, and it's our value. Ukraine is currently fighting in our war of independence. This war began 30 years after restore of our independence. But today, I think that Europe's support is crucial for Ukrainians. Today, when Europe is aging, while Ukrainians dying young, because we have a big war in our country. Russia is not only stealing our grain, but also kidnapping Ukrainian children. I think that in this Friends evening, I want to say two words about fashion. That without Ukraine, European Union is like a cord with one sleeve, because Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe, and without Ukraine, European Union and NATO is not completed integration project. Today, the Russian Empire, which camouflaged as a federation, must be dismantled. I think that it's our common goal, and Europe can continue business as usual with Putin, because Russia is not neighbor of Europe. Russia is global evil. Слава Україні! І хай живе Європа!
Thanks for that. 300 kilometers from here, maybe 350. There is the war in Ukraine. So thanks to remember that, and thanks for your talk. We are very happy, proud to have you with us. Even though there is also some people that are fighting within Russia for something that is not evil. So we also are with them. Now, Jérôme Heurtaud, bonsoir. He's French, so I speak a bit of French with him. Just a little bit. We during the preparation, you said that you have a more nuanced and differentiated response to the question of the level, the state of democracy. So coming back to democracy, how do you see this debate?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be there. Maybe before I answer your question, if you agree, I would like to come back to one of two issues that have been raised before, and especially the question of old and new Europe, because we have to be a bit frank as well. When I was younger, when I discovered Poland, because I was living in Poland for a long time, and the first time I came in the region was in 1991, like just after 1999, and there was still, it was the summer when Gorbachev was imprisoned, and then there was a demise so there was still the Soviet Union. And I remember very well that the impression we had at that time about the Eastern Europe, we began to say Central and Oriental Europe, and also, because we didn't want to be too politicized, we said the other Europe. And there was Jacques Rupnik, for instance, one of the French from Czech origin specialist of the region, was talking about the other Europe, which is a way to distinguish between the West and the East, but without using the old Soviet type word of Eastern Europe. Anyway, there was a romanticization of this region. I have to say that, because my interest in Poland was very much something linked to romanticism, because it was something far and different. And I think this is not completely bad in a way, because there are some peculiarities in the literature, in the history, which enable us to say that, yes, of course, there are very big differences, in spite of the fact that now it's EU and we have common issues we have to face with. But I wanted to say that.
What is the way we should think now about the question we are talking about? Because we had these new old Europe ideas basically about the salaries and rates and whatever, but now we have very dramatical situation on the continent, and the Polish view is very important and very specific because of the relation to Ukraine, because of the support of Ukraine, and because of the size of your country.
Well, let's not exaggerate the size, but I would agree. You know, on the issue of Ukraine, it's in a sense, we are of course right, but we were always pointing in this direction, so we are kind of a clock that doesn't work, but the time has come that it's showing directly the precisely right hour. But I'd say, alluding to what you asked in the beginning, referring backwards to the memories, I very well remember the time in the mid-80s where the favorite jokes in Germany was like, heute gestohlen, morgen in Poland, so like about your car. Today it's stolen and tomorrow you find it in Poland. Or even more inventive, fahr nach Polen, dein Wagen ist schon da. It was like, go to Poland, your car is already there. And it's gone. It's completely gone. And that, I have to say something of extreme naivety, perhaps, that what we call European Union's enlargement was one of the most successful, if not the most successful, development project in history of humanity. I know I was in the 90s, we were friends with Jérôme, was starting to be friends. I was extremely critical. I had good reasons, because the 90s were a harsh time in Poland, even Poland, that had such a low starting point, because our crisis actually, for political reasons, economically, started in the early 80s, right, or even before. So it was amazing, and also if you look at the big numbers, it was also the biggest developmental aid that was transferred from Western Europe to Central Europe in this time. So of course Ukrainians are completely right and have the right to want to join in, because it worked. I don't know if it will happen again, because unfortunately something seems to be missing. But I say, on the one hand, it was clearly a neoliberal project, right? It was this trade-off, opening of the markets. But at the same time, was enough, dare I say, French spirit of planification, right? So there was a concept, there was an idea of equilibrium, and it worked. And I have to tell you that these results, in terms of, those hard statistics, in a sense, life expectancy, socialist countries were stuck with life expectancy. It grew pretty well until mid-70s. Then, 15 years, there was stagnation on every level. And and of course, we were not equal. I mean, there was no comparison between Czechoslovakia and Bulgaria. Yet, still, there was an enormous bust. And then, so what happens now? I would be then stopping the naivety. Let's be a bit cynical, quoting Thomas Hobbes, if I remember well. People will never forgive their benefactors. So I think that now this heritage is completely erased and forgotten, or almost, and it will be, and it's back. You don't have to idealize the West, but I would say, as a former, not even so former Marxist, this European Union and its project towards the East was one of the biggest achievements historical achievements of bourgeoisie. Western bourgeoisie, there is. And one last thing, because to be a bit dialectical, I very much like the Union, but a bit much less like European Union. I don't like the adjective, you know. Why? I mean, it's a very young concept. For the first time it appears, for the first time. Doesn't mean it was dominant. In 16th century, in 18th it's happening somewhere. Then it's basically roughly replacing the universalism we had here, which was imperial, of course, Roman Empire. Huh? But it was never coherent enough, and we'll be fighting for those frontiers. By the way, it's the most beautiful paradox that the European founding documents speak of geographic limits to Europe, right? And the funny thing, to the European continent, and you know that geology teaches us that Europe is not a continent. Actually, don't say it to Russians, but it's just Asia's peninsula, right? And actually, New Zealand is a continent. You know? Did you know that? Yeah. Well, but it doesn't mean anything.
When we prepared together the conference, you said to us that for you, Central Europe, which is Poland, but also where we are here today, is the laboratory for Europe in general, and even for, in fact, the world. I mean, on a global scale. What do you mean by that?
I call this area, it's a bit larger than us, from Tallinn to Basra. It's the area where the empires collapsed. Empires collapsed at the end of, at the wake of the World War I. And of course they had to collapse. I mean, of course they were not manageable anymore like that. They needed reform. And if you look at our history, you can see all collective one, from north to south. There was enormous effort to find another form of being together, respecting, because these lands were homogeneously multinational, multicultural, multi-religious. And a lot of people, very different, some socialists, some Austrian bureaucrats, some artists, and even some demographers, they thought we need to invent, but we didn't. We followed France, we were all making nation states, we all did ethnic cleansings, and we were all victims of ethnic cleansings. We also had 3 spectacular genocides, as you know, even if they were not completely our own making, right? But in this sense, the new political form, the Kantian political form, something else than nation state, this I enormously respect, because I think that this idea that nation states can be simply universalized and everybody will be happy, it's not so.
If I may just try to answer a question on civil society, whether it can be turned against democracy. And I think, yes, it can. It depends who is running it, you may say. And I think, for instance, in Hungary, the current government is very skillful in creating a kind of civil society very close to them. So I think when speaking of civil society and democracy, we need some adjectives, which are totally crucial. Autonomous, independent from the power, and pluralistic. So I think when the next time we will talk with Marine Le Pen on the subject, you know.
Yes, but let's take, when I was young, I take an example. When I was young in Paris, 2 of the most famous young, innovative activists in LGBT community were a guy named Sébastien Chenu and another one named Renaud Camus. We are friends of them. They were like the new energetic LGBT activists in France. One is now vice president, or used to be very recently vice president of the National Parliament as a National Front activist. The second one, Renaud Camus, as you know, wrote this famous sentence about le grand remplacement, and is even extremely right to Marine Le Pen, which means a lot. So, you know, the idea of the civil society with this kind of LGBT-friendly people ended up being in the other side. That's my point.
No, but again, let's forget about binary visions like good civil society, supporting democracy, and evil governments, or, you know, it's much more complicated, and you can have positive civil society in France and negative. This question of European identity and European heterogeneity is overestimated when we discuss it, I think, among us Europeans, and from the rest of the world, I think we don't need to be geologically a continent to be considered as one. The last point, you know, when you spoke about that we shouldn't forget that in the 90s things were a bit romanticized, and actually you were keeping using the word we, and I was wondering what actually you mean. We said we don't agree actually, who as we? We Europeans or we West and East Europeans? Because again, my point, if it was that, is that on many things, I mean, Czechs are closer to Austrians than to Poles. I think that between Estonia and Slovakia is much bigger difference than between Estonia and Finland, and so on. And it's not only about geographical proximity. It's about mentality. It's about the vision of history. It's about many other things. So, and it was my point that again, Europe is heterogeneous, but this heterogeneity is based on various aspects, and depending on the aspect we choose, we will have very different lists of who is we and who is the other.
But there is a change, and it means we do share the common political institutions. This is something very new, right? Since Roman Empire, it didn't have a common political institutions. So this is something, a brand new reality, which...
And they work. You know, European Parliament is a wonderful thing.
No, but I mean, we agree. I just wanted to say that, of course, we are all different. I mean, between Spain and France. You know, when the very famous word, vérité en deçà des Pyrénées, mensonge au-delà, je prononce très mal, mais so each country has its own history, and when it comes to populism, we see how it works as a communicating vessels, because when Poland, for instance, is dominated by peace, then there is a victory of PO, and at the same time Slovakia comes to the hands of smear. So, but this is something that we cannot change. It's the historical experience. So the 30 or 40 years of common management of EU by a narrow number of countries have effects on their experience and then their attitude. So, of course, there are these divisions like East and West are not longer interesting for understanding what happens. But you know, when I say we, now it's the academic community. When the academic community, wherever it comes, was working on post-socialism, as we call it, for a long time, they had this term of path dependency, the dependency of the experience, and I think it's still ongoing processes. So we have to take into account the effect of this history and also the present situation to understand the behavior of one country or another one.
Now there's an opportunity for 2 or 3 questions. Il y a l'opportunité de prendre 2 ou 3 questions. Donc voilà, n'hésitez pas, on a un micro qui voyage.
We see you. We thought you disappeared. Suddenly you're here.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to ask, so when you've spoken, pretty much everyone of you has spoken about the risks that come with the rise of populist rhetoric throughout Europe, regardless of it being the old Europe, the new Europe, East, West, North, South. So what position or what resolutions or solutions in general should the EU adopt to combat this rise of these extremist rhetorics and to come back to this, I don't want to call it the great ideal of Europe, but this European unity in stark contrast, with the rhetoric that is more prevalent in today's day and age. Thank you.
Thank you. It's up to you. Anybody can answer.
I won't answer your question directly, but I think what would help answering the question is the realization that, in fact, you mentioned you counted the right-wing or far-right influences around Europe, but you know, what I mean, the good term for it is hard to find. Some call it right-wing populism, some call it conservative revolution, but I don't like conservative. Conservatives are too respectable. I don't like them, but despite of all, there is a very respectable intellectual tradition. It's something else. I like to call it authoritarian term. Why? Because it doesn't only concern democracy. It's not only that the United States, they were in power and they maybe are coming back to power. The same in Brazil, in Argentina, and South Korea. one of the most extreme cases and completely overlooked the Philippines, right? But interestingly, something similar happened in China. I mean, China was never a democracy, but until 2013 it was a republic at least. It followed more or less its constitution, right? That the degree of freedom of research and freedom of speech was very high. Now it's all gone. I'm not even mentioning Russia, right? Because they were also never a democracy, but that's the difference between now and 20 years ago. So again, sometimes history matters, culture matters, and sometimes it's as if it didn't matter. So I think like we are still facing the question, what the hell is happening really?
A quick answer. On the ground, I think to fight against populism, it's education. You know, we have to teach civic education. We have to teach EU values to the children. It will prevent them. We have to quality education, you know, to prevent them to believe any fake news. So this is very important and a long-term process.
If you asked what the EU should do, I don't think the EU is the one to do something. I think that the key is at national level and the local oppositions, if they are oppositions or local opponents of these political parties, have to do the job, basically. The EU can help or can be counterproductive. So, of course, the EU, I think all the EU leaders or all the leaders of other member states, when commenting on what's going on in a country, when adopting decisions which have an impact on that, should first ask the question, doing that, am I helping the opposition in the country or not? Am I just getting easy points for my national audience, but actually I create a problem to the opposition in the ill-born country, because actually it will be misused by the propaganda of the regime? So sometimes I think that some comments, you know, let's be frank, I think about Hungary. Some comments on Hungary were not really helpful, because Viktor Orbán was very good in exploiting them and using it to show, okay, see the opposition, they are just representatives of these foreigners who comment on us without knowing us. And so I think the EU should first be very cautious, stand firmly on its values.
Just 2 words. First, I think we have to have we need to open our eyes. It's not only the question of populist movements or conservative movements or illiberal parties and powers. I think that there is a tendency of, I would say, demoralization of politics. There's a tendency of identity politics more beyond than these very parties and movements, and it's very important, I think, to say that. In France, for instance, the far right is not at the government, but the current government is preparing a new law on immigration, which is exactly the same as would be done by the far right if they would be on power. Almost. I can guarantee that. I can guarantee that, and I can give other examples if you need. So that's the first point. Second point, it won't come from the organizations, from the institution, it's come from you. Even not only from civil society. Don't be free riders. Don't say that there are some civil society organization, they will deal with that. No, it's your problem. It's our problem, it's your problem. No intellectual, no militant, no political oppositionist will work instead of you. So I think it's very basic, but we all have to open our eyes on everyday basis, reading the press with critical approach, looking at everything that happens everywhere, but with a very much open mind. And if I can go further on that, because we are talking about identity politics, is just wanted to react to what you said also before, because it's also important to speak frankly between between each other, because inside the EU we need to be frank each other. I think it's also important not to go for, not to employ the same kind of words or sentences used by those who are doing identity politics. For instance, you mentioned the past of Ukraine colonized by Russia. That's a fact. But don't forget also some part of history when Poland was also occupied the Eastern Galicia. And it's also important not to go into revisionism, historically speaking, because it's not necessary. Because, for example, the Polish country, the Polish people, are you friends? Now we are friends. We are supporting, I mean, as French people, we are supporting Ukraine. But don't forget that even 10 years ago, there were still some very big tensions between the Polish government, the Ukrainian government, toward the memory of the past, relating to the killings in Volhynia in 1943, related to the killings of Ukrainians after the First World War. And I think it's very important to also have this objective and critical view on our common history to build a future together. Because if not, it won't never work, I would say.
Bah ici, on est en Slovaquie, on était avec des Polonais, on était avec, je l'ai dit, un Ukrainien, il y avait des Ukrainiens dans la salle, il y avait aussi des Tchèques, etc. Donc des Français, on est forcément dans le rapport Est-Ouest, qui est un peu un faux rapport, parce qu'il n'y a pas d'un côté l'Ouest et d'un côté l'Est. Enfin, c'est vrai qu'il y a un l'Ouest et l'Est d'un point de vue géographique, évidemment, mais il n'y a pas une Old Europe et une New Europe. Il y a essentiellement, je dirais, des divisions, des dissensions entre des évolutions peut-être plus libérales, d'autres peut-être un petit peu plus autoritaires, aussi tout ça avec imprégné d'autres questions, la question, je dirais, de la modernité du rapport à l'Union européenne, au libéralisme, à l'illibéralisme, à la question de la démocratie comme elle va, la question aussi de l'état de droit et des libertés. Mais tout ça n'est pas d'un côté serait à l'ouest et de l'autre serait à l'est. C'est beaucoup plus divisé. Il y a au fond en France des forces illibérales, des forces libérales. Il y a des gens qui sont plus autoritaires, des gens qui sont peut-être plus fortement imprégnés de démocratie. Et c'est vrai aussi en Slovaquie. Et donc vous avez des tensions qui existent non seulement entre les pays, aussi au sein des pays d'Europe dite centrale et orientale, il y a des tensions. Et enfin, vous avez des tensions au sein même de chacun de ces pays, à travers les générations, à travers parfois les origines ethniques, linguistiques, selon les pays d'Europe centrale et orientale, entre la Roumanie et la Hongrie, entre, je dirais, la République tchèque et la Pologne, entre les Slovaques et les Tchèques. Et alors, c'est là où je crois que nous sommes tous le produit d'identités multiples. On peut être en désaccord, par exemple, politiquement, mais on peut être en accord, alors même qu'on a ces désaccords, parce que, je sais pas, on est tous les deux intellectuels et donc on respecte le débat d'idées, ou alors on est deux femmes lesbiennes et donc il y a un lien qui va se faire, un dialogue qui est possible, alors même qu'on est en désaccord sur la politique. Et je crois que c'est toujours important de penser qu'on n'est pas le produit d'une seule identité. Ici, on est slovaque, mais on appartient à l'Europe centrale et orientale, on appartient à une identité culturelle qui est aussi avec les Tchèques, et puis on est aussi européen. Et donc déjà, ça fait plusieurs identités.